We join Wyoming Liberty Group, and today it's Maureen, who I have it on good authority, is anti-science. She's going to tell us all about it, and she doesn't want kids to learn anything about science. Did I read your article correctly?
Not
No.
exactly. No, not exactly.
Okay. Well, I mean, some people will read that article, Maureen, and that's what they'll accuse you of, right?
Well, that's because they haven't actually looked at the next generation science standards. I mean, science is important. Kids need to actually learn science when they're in science class. What they don't need to have when they're in science class, however, is green indoctrination. That's what we don't want to see in science class.
And I think what is scary to some people in states like Wyoming, we consider ourselves a very conservative state, and yet you're pointing out that we do have some green indoctrination going on in schools in the state of Wyoming.
Absolutely, we do. And luckily, what has happened is because of a big grassroots movement, the legislature did, in fact, defund what we call the next generation science standards. The next generation science standards, if you go through especially the earth science section, are actually quite frightening if you know anything about the whole global warming alarmist agenda, this whole idea that man-made carbon dioxide is going to create some kind of climate Armageddon, some kind of global warming Armageddon 100 years from now, and something must be done about it, at of course a huge cost to taxpayers and a huge reduction in people's standards of living. So last week at the Next Generation Science Standard, at the State Board of Education meeting, they discussed the Next Generation Science Standards and what they were going to do about them, which actually didn't make any sense because the legislature had defunded the Next Generation Science Standards, which meant there was nothing they actually could do about it because they couldn't spend any money to do it. There was this whole business in the mainstream media about how, the State Board of Education has got until July the 1st to essentially ram these science standards down the throats of unsuspecting children. But obviously, the reading standards have been declining for quite some time, because if the reporters and the news editors had actually read the budget footnote, they would have seen that defunding occurred immediately. In other words, upon passage of the budget bill was back at the beginning of March. The budget footnote actually says, neither the State Board of Education nor the department shall expend any amount appropriated under this section for any review or adoption of the Next Generation Science Standards as developed by the National Science Teachers Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Research Council, and Achieve. This footnote is effective immediately. What's confusing about that?
Well, and let me ask you, and I don't want to get us off on a different topic here, but does this have something to do with the Common Core money that was coming in? Because Common Core has these exact same standards. So if we cut this off, do we cut off money coming from somewhere else?
No, I don't think. I'm not really too sure about the funding for this and how it's connected to the Common Core, but this is all it's sort of the bigger part of the whole Common Core educational reform movement. And I think part of the reason parents got so activated so early in the process in order to stop the Next Generation Science Standards is because the Common Core math and literature standards, English standards, just sort of appeared from out of nowhere, and then suddenly these kids were learning math that was just completely odd and very unmath-like. And so what parents wanted to do right away before, and this is the way to do it. People need to be very aware of what's going on at the legislature, and especially what's going on with these special interest groups that are working in these departments to push forward certain agendas, so they can stop them before they're actually in place, because once it's just like the math and English standards, they're in place now. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of them, but we have managed to stop the Next Generation Science Standards because we did that before they got in, and this is the way to actually stop bad policies from going forward, and that's stop them before they actually start.
Well, okay, with the Next Generation Science Standards, I'm curious, is the reason that they had this meeting, even though it's already been defunded, because so many special interest groups didn't like that it was defunded and decided to get together and hold a meeting?
No. It was the State Board of Education. They had a meeting, and but certainly you've got there are 3 Democrats on the board, and you've got people on the board who are very in favor of these standards, because of course what they want to do is drive forward this particular eco-activist agenda. But what parents want to do is stop, and of course what we want to do also is stop this from happening, because we want kids in school to learn science in an unbiased, unpartisan way. We don't want kids to be indoctrinated with certain things that just, I mean, with a lot of misinformation that is in fact included in the State Board of Education, in the Next Generation Science Standards. So essentially, I think before we do that, and so we can go through a little bit about what's in the Next Generation Science Standards so people can see exactly what sort of propaganda is being forced down these kids, potentially could be forced down these kids' throats. But first, I think it's really important for people, you know, this goes to what you were saying at first, people need to understand that I personally, and most people, value the environment. We want to have a clean environment. And if we look at the places where the environment is in fact the cleanest, those places are in economically advanced nations. U.S. is a very clean environment. I mean, compare the environment, the air quality in the U.S. with the air quality in Mexico, or the, you know, all these different kinds of actual real pollutants. They're much worse in the third world than they are in the first world. And even here in the U.S., the environment and the environment is actually much cleaner now, and air quality is much better now than it was in the past. I mean, think about, you remember back in the 70s, Lake Erie was a total cesspool. That was completely cleaned up. Now, why is it that that sort of thing can happen in a developed, wealthy nation, but tends not to happen in an underdeveloped, poorer nation? It's because, hey, we've got the money and the resources to be able to afford to keep that environment cleaner. Unlike a place where people have to worry about their next meal is going to come from. I mean, really, think about it. If you are going to die by the time you're 40, because that's the lifespan in some of these countries, do you really care that there's a factory next door spewing out pollutants that would kill you when you're 80? You're not going to live that long. Right. So your priorities are, where's my next meal going to come from, not is the air quality clean?
Well, and I would think, again, looking at the notes that you have in your article, I would think that we're mainly worried about in this state that there's just one point of view being offered here, not a multiple point of view, because science would be many points of view. Not everybody agrees.
Well, no, I mean, and there's this big move on with the global warming alarmists that there's a consensus, global warming is happening, it's caused by man-made carbon dioxide, no more questions. But that's not science. Right. Skepticism is part of what science is all about, you know. And the thing with the Next Generation Science Standards is it's very anti-human in a way, and that's really what the left is about as well. They think there are too many people, they're a scourge on Mother Earth. We need to reduce the human population. Now, unfortunately, they're not leading by example. But the things that you see in the Next Generation Science Standards are things like human-created habitat destruction, pollution, introduction of invasive species, overexploitation, and climate change can disrupt an ecosystem and threaten the survival of some species. Well, let's keep in mind that some of the biggest extinctions happened a long time ago. I mean, human beings had nothing to do with the extinction of the dinosaurs, okay? That was a much bigger extinction than what's going on right now, which, I mean, keep in mind also that scientists are finding new species all the time. So to say that, you know, human beings are creating some sort of scourge on the earth is just complete misinformation and propaganda.
Holly is holding on line one. Holly, what you got for us?
Hi, Glenn. I went to a meeting of the school board, the trustees here in town, a week or two ago, and it was a presentation of the science standards that Campbell County, they had quite a presentation about what they're going to do, and they are bypassing what the state legislators said. They are going to be doing this new generation. And the presentation they gave, it made me sick. I looked at the Common Core standards, which they're calling the new generation, and I looked at what is now being taught, and it's bad. There were very many angry parents there, but they're not being heard. And here to give you just an idea of what the difference is, they want kids to answer a question about geology, and it gives a mountain that's on two separate continents and wants to know, you know, gives them a tiny bit of information, but then wants to know which one would fall down the most and which one would look, you know, which is the youngest and which is the oldest. Just by looking. They're not going to teach vocabulary. They don't want people to remember things by rote. Well, pardon me, we had to learn letters first and then what those letters sound like before we could learn to read. You have to do the same thing with science. You have got to have a good foundation of vocabulary and an understanding of what those vocabulary words mean before you can go on and do the labs and the other type of work in order to be a scientist. But our school district here in Gillette is going to put these standards in, no matter what we say.
All right, thank you, Holly. So does this sound like the same kind of standards you were talking about, Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, they're actually breaking the law.
Okay.
So we'll take a look at that. I'll get Amy Evans to take a look at that. She's been looking at this stuff quite carefully, and I mean, if that in fact is what's going on, I mean, they're breaking the law, and that's the end of the story right there.
Right.
They cannot do that. They cannot.
Well, I wonder, aren't they supposed to have some kind of funding for this? Where would they get the funding to continue the curriculum? Or do they need funding? Can they just decide that they're going to take this textbook and not that textbook and maybe not tell the state?
Oh, I mean, like do a switcheroo with the funding? No, I mean you can't. Well, I mean, people can do whatever they want, right? But there are consequences to that. So that's the thing, because you really don't want these next generation science standards going forward. I mean, they'd be breaking the law. That's just the end of it. So.
Well, and then we get back to the point we made just before we took Holly's call, and science is not just one point of view. If you say the science is settled, the debate is over, well, then you just close the door to science, because the science is never settled on any topic, and the debate is never over. And so what we're trying to do here in the state of Wyoming, and I guess I'm going to be interested to see what other states have to say about the move that we had to defund this, is that we actually probably want the debate in our schools rather than shutting the door to all debate and only having one point of view.
Well, in fact, this indoctrination in schools is something that isn't just happening here in the U.S. It happened in the U.K. as well, and there was a parent who was very concerned, and he actually took this situation to court, and he wanted the judge to actually talk about whether showing Al Gore's movie An Inconvenient Truth in schools in the UK, United Kingdom, was breaking a provision in the Education Act forbidding the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in school. And so this High Court judge, he ruled on that, and he said, yeah, in fact, if the movie Inconvenient Truth is shown in schools, you're actually indoctrinating. So you're actually breaking this particular law. So teachers are not supposed to be showing that movie in schools and representing it as science. And the thing is, there are a lot of these same inaccuracies in the next generation science standards. For example, if we look at something that it actually says, if you look in the next generation science standards framework and core ideas section, you'll read, it is not only that human activities play a major role in climate change, but also that impacts of climate change, for example, increased frequency of severe storms due to ocean warming, have begun to influence human activities. But there is no evidence that human activities play a major role in global warming that would lead to, for example, an increased frequency of storms. I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is this IPCC, effectively the command center for all things alarmist about global warming, even they backed away on this idea that global warming is going to cause an increased frequency of storms. They just recently, I mean, just March 31st, 2014, just a few weeks ago, they put out their 5th assessment report, and in there they, what we say is significantly downplayed its storm increase alarmism when they said there is a low confidence in region-specific projections of storminess and associated storm surges. And you might say, well, why would they be downplaying this idea that there's going to be an increased frequency of storms? Well, that's because there's a decreased frequency of storms. In fact, researchers in Florida, they concluded that the 2007-2008 hurricane season represented the lowest level of tropical activity in the northern hemisphere in 30 years. And in fact, 2013 was the very first Atlantic hurricane season that they didn't have any hurricanes since 1994. So I mean, storm frequency is going down. These are the facts of reality, and yet in these science standards, they're saying things like, well, man-made global warming is going to increase the frequency of storms. Well, that's just completely not true. These are not the sort of things that children should be taught in school.
Jeff has been hanging on the line. Hi, Jeff. What you got for us?
Hey, I can't remember who you said created these standards? Some teachers associations?
Those were the National Science Teachers Association, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the National Research Council, and Achieve. Those were the 4 groups that worked with 26 states. I don't actually have the list. But the interesting thing about it is that only 9 of those 26, plus DC, took on the science standards, so the rest of them didn't. And Wyoming was just one. And we get singled out as though we're some sort of flat earth kind of place that, you know, only care about having some big oil industry. Well, hold on a second. We weren't the only ones who didn't accept these standards, and a lot of these other states who were involved who didn't take them keep on making up these excuses. Well, you know, we're doing the Common Core thing now. We don't have time to actually put in even more new standards. We just want to take a little bit of a break. And so, I mean, they're not moving forward with these standards either. And I think as people become more and more aware of what these kinds of what these standards include, even fewer states are going to take them on. So I think, you know, we're sort of on the leading edge here by saying, hold on a second, we're not going to fund this. The way we can stop it is by defunding it. And keep in mind, not even the governor vetoed that footnote, so he's on side to stop the advancement of this next generation science standards. So this, the caller Holly, who said that your school district up there is going to go forward with them anyway. I mean, they shouldn't be doing that, and we'll definitely be taking a look at that.
Jeff had a follow-up question for you. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so anyway. All of these groups that created these standards are supposedly scientists, correct?
Supposedly.
Okay. Do they actually believe what they're trying to push down our throats? I mean, I'm a scientist, and I know the more carbon dioxide that's in the air, the better the plants and the trees grow. They get bigger, and when they get bigger, that means they produce more oxygen, and the environment takes care of itself. I mean...
Yeah.
How can is this mostly politically based?
Well, that's a good question. Well, that's the last one you'll get a chance to answer, Maureen. Mostly political based. What do you think?
Well, I think it's mostly funding based, because remember, one of the ways that scientists a big way that the scientists get funding these days is government funding. And which scientists get government funding? Well, the ones who stir up the most fear among people. You know, I mean, if you've got this clear and present danger, we've got this global warming Armageddon coming, we need more money to study this, and more money to make up these mathematical models so we can build these crystal balls so we can look into the future and say, oh yeah, in 100 years, if we don't, you know, spend even more money on mathematical models, that we're going to have some sort of, you know, be inundated and floods and all the rest of it. That's, I think, I mean, you follow the money, right? You want to know why these people do this?
You're saying that everything's okay. So, Maureen, thank you for coming on as always. I got to go to the break at the bottom of the hour. Talk to you guys. I hope next week or the week after.
Thanks, Len.